Good morning, everyone. I have just hit the mute all button so that we can have David join us, play some in-gathering music for us. Over to you, David.
I'm playing the Magic Bus.
Thank you, David. So he brought us rolling into church in the Magic Bus, with Pete Townshend and the Who. So good morning. Welcome to Paint Branch Unitarian Universalist Church, meeting here in cyberspace this morning. I'm Clark Ritz. My pronouns are he and him. I'm one of a team of worship associates that works with the minister, church staff, and others in bringing you these worship services, even when it's best that we don't meet in person. We strive to be a welcoming community. We are from all over. Our families have come from different countries. Among us, we have a range of sexualities. We have a range of shapes and sizes and appearances and identities. We have different physical abilities from one another. And we've been waiting for you to join us. And speaking of here, we acknowledge, though we are not in our physical church spaces, that the land where our church's building stands is the ancestral home of the Piscataway people, who have a history in the region stretching from the Potomac River towards the Chesapeake Bay, going back thousands of years. Whatever brought you online this morning, we're so glad you decided to share this morning with us. Before we move into worship, let's remember our Zoom skills. Find your mute button. It's a microphone icon, probably on the bottom of your screen. And make sure you're muted for most of the service. Find the bubble for your chat screen. There are different places on your screen depending on what type of device you're using. You can set your own pace reading the chats by scrolling up and down. You may be able to mute the chats if you find them distracting. You'll also be able to switch probably between speaker view and gallery view, which can let you see more than one person at a time. And just a reminder that we are recording on Facebook Live and Zoom.
I'm muted. It's right there.
Right now in chat, please say how many people are in attendance via your connection. One, if it's just you. That way we can get a sense of how many are attending the service. And if you're visiting us for the first or second time, I invite you to post who you are in chat if you feel comfortable doing so. You can contact the church office if you'd like someone to reach out to you with more information. After service today, we will have coffee hour breakout rooms, so you can have discussion in smaller groups. At the end of the service, you'll receive a pop-up invitation to join a breakout room with a few other folks grouped at random. If, however, you would like to stay here in this main Zoom room for follow-on discussion with our guest speaker, Sister Richelle Friedman, you may decline the breakout room and stay in the main Zoom room. Now, let us enter into our time of worship in this unconventional sacred space that we found and with this beloved community. Sister Richelle will share a reading with us.
She's muted.
I believe you're still muted, Sister Richelle.
Excuse me. This is a reading from A Time Is Now, A Call to Uncommon Courage by Sister Joan Chittister. Everywhere there are people who, despite finding themselves mired in periods of national darkness or personal marginalization, refuse to give up the thought of a better future or give in to the allurements of a deteriorating presence. They never lose hope. The hope that the values they learned in the best of times, or the courage it takes to reclaim their world from the worst of times, are the commitments worthwhile in their lives. These people, the best of ourselves, are legion, and they are everywhere. It is the unwavering faith, the open hearts, and the piercing courage of people from every level of society that carries us through major social breakdown in the emergence again of the humanization of humanity. In every region, everywhere, there are the unsung but mighty voices of community, high-mindedness, and deep resolve. They are the prophets of every era who prod the rest of the world into seeing newly what it means to be fully alive, personally, nationally, and spiritually. You are these average but courageous people who forever seek the truth, defend the weak, bring the peace, and always, always, always stand up to protest injustice.
Thank you. I invite Wendy Schlegel to light our chalice for us this morning.
There we go. Sorry about that. I will now light the chalice. Of course, if I can get, there we go. Please join me in saying the chalice lighting. We light this chalice I'm sorry, I have something in front of the thing. Okay. We light the chalice to celebrate Unitarian Universalism. This is the church of the open mind, the helping hands, the loving heart, and the radiant spirit. Encendamos esta CHALICE para celebrar el unitarismo universalísimo. Esta es la iglesia de la mente
de las manos
abierta de las manos amigas del amor del corazón y del espíritu radiante. Thank you.
And now, let us join our hearts and minds in a time of prayer and meditation. As we gather in community, we carry with us life's hurts and its great joys. Sometimes sharing these joys and concerns in community can help. I have a few to share for the congregation this morning. First, a joy. You'll notice that David Chapman is back with us. He was ill for a few weeks, not with COVID. And he's missed playing for us all terribly. He even dragged himself out of bed with a fever of 102 all the way to the church for the Ingathering Sunday service, only to be met with technical difficulties, and he could not connect that day. Since it's the first Ingathering service in 18 years that he hasn't played, we'll cut him a little slack. And we're very happy to see his triumphant return. I also want to acknowledge some sorrows. I know this past week, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's life was celebrated in the nation's capital. I know that many of us feel her loss deeply. And I also acknowledge the loss of Alondria Williams. She was a co-moderator of the Unitarian Universalist Association General Assembly. She's a church leader, an organizer, and an activist. This fierce advocate for social justice passed away this week at the age of 41. You are now welcome to share your written joys and sorrows by entering them into the chat bar as David plays what he had originally planned for our Ingathering Sunday, Home from the Wiz, written by Charlie Small. Let us take a moment to acknowledge all that has been shared, as well as the joys and sorrows that remain unspoken and yet are in our hearts and our minds. May we hold all these and one another in love and kindness, so that this congregation may be a source of strength and comfort, courage and hope in the days and weeks ahead. Thank you, David. Our chalice dancers will lead us in a congregational movement. So please switch, if you're able to, your Zoom view to gallery and look for the chalice dancers in red tops to follow along. You may do this seated or standing as you're willing or able, or simply move your body with your spirit and the music of India Ari and recording of I Am Light.
Pieces of the brokenness inside. I am light. 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 I am the mistakes that I have made, or any of the things that caused me pain. I am not the pieces of the dream I left behind. I am light. 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 Yeah. I am light. I am light. I am not the color of my eyes. I am not the skin on the outside. I am not my age. I am not my race. My soul inside is all light. All light. All light. Yeah. All light. I am light. I am light. I am light. I am light. Yeah. I am divinity defined. I am the God on the inside. I am a star, a piece of it all. I am light.
Thank you. Thank you to our chalice dancers. If you switched your Zoom to gallery view, you may want to switch it back to speaker view, unless you don't want to close up on my face. So our service this week is about being inspired to act by our faith in our religious teachings. Learning about Sister Richelle and the organizations that she's a part of is inspiring. They feel called to this work so powerfully by their understanding of their teachings. They continue to do it despite opposition from leadership in their own church sometimes. My own personal faith as an atheist and a humanist leads me to the conviction that we, us folks here right now, are the ones who must help each other. Unitarian Universalism and our principles and our legacy of deeds, not creeds, have strengthened my belief that we must act. I think that's what our faith calls for. And sometimes I do act. I vote, which I think many of you do in line with our, in line with our fifth principle. I donate money to organizations doing work that I feel strongly about, or to organizations who are trying to feed those who are food insecure in our community. I'm motivated to serve this faith community in roles like this one, but that's the easy stuff, relatively speaking. What about the hard stuff, the uncomfortable stuff? Do I still act then? Sometimes. I've had uncomfortable conversations with colleagues at work, for example. I stopped a guy I overheard in an office who used a derogatory term against a woman on the news. I explained to him that if that's a word he wouldn't use against a man, well, that makes the attack sexist. I crossed the room to a group of male coworkers who were disparaging one of our female colleagues. I told them to stop. I explained to the guy in the next cubicle that he didn't need to know the detailed technical specifications of my body, then he certainly didn't need to know the detailed technical specifications of a transgender colleague either. That last one made the guy across the way exclaim, I can't even believe you're having this conversation. I have had difficult, emotional conversations about politics with close family and friends from my hometown in Arkansas. I can't acknowledge that I still have racist reactions to Black people sometimes. That after growing up in a very white town with 0 Black friends or classmates for most of my youth, that part of my brain still tries to label Black as different. And I'm working on that. And some of these things have been harder for me to do, made me feel uncomfortable, but I've never been in any danger myself, even in occasionally tense situations. I'm still not taking that much of a risk myself. I figure that most of you in this religious community would still have my back. And while I may have helped in some places on a local scale or an individual level, there is so much more to do. I'm inspired by Sister Richelle and her fellow nuns on the bus, who are addressing big issues on a national scale. They're working where the rubber literally meets the road. They're even willing to put themselves at odds with their own church leadership. I can't imagine how uncomfortable that can be sometimes. So I'll end with a question, the thought, how can we let our faith inspire us to do the hard stuff? And now you're welcome to follow along at home, still on mute, as we sing We Are a Gentle, Angry People. Now Keith Miller and Deborah Street will perform As a Fire is Meant for Burning.
Can you hear us?
As a fire is meant for burning with a bright and warming flame, so we all are meant for mission, giving glory to God's name, not to preach our creeds or customs, but to build a bridge of care. We join hands across the nations, finding neighbors everywhere. We are learners, we are teachers, we are pilgrims on the way. We are seekers, we are givers, we are vessels made of clay. By our gentle, loving actions, we would show that God is light. In a humble, listening spirit, we would live to God's delight. As a green bud in the springtime is a sign of life renewed, so may we be signs of oneness midst peoples many-hued. As a rainbow lights the heavens when a storm is past and gone, may our lives reflect the radiance of God's new and glorious dawn.
Thank you, Keith and Deborah. This morning, we are joined by Sister Richelle Friedman. Her community is the Sisters of the Presentation of the Blessed Virgin Mary, based in Dubuque, Iowa. She has decades of legislative and policy experience and is the Director of Public Policy at the Coalition on Human Needs, an alliance of national organizations working together to address the needs of low-income and other vulnerable people. She is also part of Nuns on the Bus, a Catholic advocacy group. Since 2012, they have toured across the country on a literal bus, just as the name suggests, to prophetically speak for justice and advocate for adequate federal policies. We are so happy to have you here with us this morning.
Thank you, Clark, and all here present for welcoming me to your community. As you've said, I've been invited to speak with you about Nuns on the Bus, how the tours came to be, the faith motivation that drives the tours, activities we engage in, and how they have touched my heart. And you may not be surprised to learn that your Unitarian Universalist Church is part of the story. I'm here in part, I think, because some of you saw Sister Simone Campbell give the inspiring, hopeful prayer the last night of the Democratic Convention in August. A Jewish friend of mine shared with me that he felt so included in her prayer. And perhaps if you heard her, you did as well, because inclusivity is a hallmark of your Unitarian Universalist Church. Reflection and prayer is also an integral part of the Nuns on the Bus experience. One constant was that every morning before the bus took off, often very early, we sisters would gather for prayer. Always a reading from scripture, quiet time, and some sharing. Now, just for a little bit more of background, much has been written about how Catholic sisters have been on the cutting edge of justice work in our church. Many communities like mine were invited to the United States when it was still considered a missionary territory. We were invited to address the greatest needs. So my community came from Ireland in 1875 to establish schools. Others came to open hospitals. Then over time, religious communities of women saw that the need was to be among people who were made economically poor by a system that didn't work for them, to be with immigrants, those in prison, victims of trafficking. And yes, there was a need to do political ministry. Peter Henriot is a Jesuit priest, and he authored a book called Our Best Kept Secret, Catholic Social Teachings. It spells out the principles of Catholic social teachings that underlie our call to justice. These include the dignity of the human person, the universal purpose of material things, the solidarity of the human family, the dignity of work, the common good, and the option for the poor. This latter overarching gospel principle is the obligation to attend to people who are poor. In her social teachings, the Church holds very strongly that the truth and moral fabric of our nation is determined by how well it provides for the poor in its midst. Now, if all this has a familiar ring to you, it might be because there's a parallelism between Catholic social teaching principles and the Unitarian Universalist principles. The inherent dignity and worth of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, respect for the interdependent web of all existence, and the goal of a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. When I read the most recent edition of Branches, it spoke so strongly to me of your commitment to these principles. In 2010, Sister Simone wrote the Nuns letter, published in the New York Times and signed by 55 women religious in support of the Affordable Care Act. I witnessed firsthand that the letter provided the impetus for the votes of undecided Catholic members of Congress needed to pass the legislation. Now, all of this is background to Nuns on the Bus. Currently, Nuns on the Bus is on our 7th tour. This year, it's virtual because of COVID. The first tour was in 2012. Paul Ryan was chairman of the House Budget Committee, and the budgets he was proposing dramatically cut programs critical to low-income and vulnerable families. It was also the year that Pope Benedict began an investigation into U.S. Catholic sisters because he deemed the theology of many progressive sisters as an affront to traditional Catholic beliefs. He also specifically named Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice, the organization Simone heads, as being a problem. Perhaps the word of Simone's letter drew his attention. At that time, Simone and I were among the participants in a regular strategy meeting to plan actions around issues we wanted Congress and the administration to address. During one of the meetings, Simone asked those present to pray for her and Network, who were under stress due to the Vatican investigation. The Spirit was at work. In a subsequent meeting, the idea emerged to have Catholic sisters board a bus, travel throughout the country to highlight the good work sisters were doing and pointing out the need to push back against legislation, including Paul Ryan's budget, that worked against people for whom and with whom the sisters were serving. I was privileged to be on the first tour as well as subsequent tours. We were motivated by Catholic social teachings to bring media's attention to work being done not only by sisters, but by other dedicated faith-based organizations in response to the needs of the most vulnerable. We did site visits to shelters, school programs, centers dedicated to serving immigrants, and soup kitchens. And the outpouring of the support we received at every place we went drew enormous press coverage. I remember well a site visit to Mercy Neighborhood Ministries started by the Sisters of Mercy in a low-income area in Philadelphia. Among the many programs for adults and children was an after-school program. Now, we were going to be visiting on a Saturday, but when the kids found out we were coming, they wanted to be there, and were they ever. One young 10-year-old was invited to speak at the press conference we held. He approached the microphone with utter confidence and announced, "Welcome to Mercy Ministries. My name is Mikkel Brown, and I am a shining star. I have been an honor student since I started at Project Mercy." A fifth grader took me on a tour, proudly showing me his classroom and explaining how each afternoon before they began their time together, they did a meditation. How impressive to see kids excited about learning, growing in self-confidence, and meditating. In addition to the site visits, we sponsored rallies aimed at promoting just legislation. We also did educational town halls hosted by churches, including, again, yours. We were engaged in listening sessions, which expanded our understanding and deeply enriched us. The 2015 bus tour started in St. Louis. After the shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, a St. Louis suburb, a group of Black mothers and grandmothers got together and formed Mothers to Mothers, first to talk with each other and then to initiate conversations with white mothers. For nearly 3 hours, the 8 of us sisters on the bus listened and dialogued with the 5 Black women who shared their heart-wrenching stories. Some of them had sons killed by police. All of them had the talk with their sons. That experience helps inform my sense today of why the Black Lives Matter movement is so important and so overdue. Racism is a deep part of our history, and racial justice calls us who benefit from white privilege to proactively change our system. And Ebony's profound sermon 2 weeks ago was a more recent call that we must address racism. I documented our first tour in 2012 by creating a book with highlights from the trip. I want to share with you this page. So many of the places we went, Unitarian Universalists were present. This is from a press conference near Richmond, and you were there. One couple, Donna and Charlie, traveled 5 hours round trip just to be present for the press conference and the conversations that followed. As I said, not all of our site visits were places started by sisters. This is Shalom Farms, started and managed by these 2 wonderful young men from United Methodist Urban Ministries to provide food for people who were living in a food desert. While sometimes very intense, we also had fun on our trips. Coming from an Iowa farm background, it did my heart good when these guys allowed me to drive the tractor for a few rounds. It has been a humbling experience to arrive in so many towns and rural settings and cities across the nation, to be met by cheering crowds and signs supporting Catholic sisters. I think the backdrop of the Vatican investigation caused some who'd never met a Catholic sister to want to show their support. I remember going to Wisconsin one frigid day, October 2014. We were late, and a large crowd was standing outside in the cold to cheer our arrival. One family brought a young man in a wheelchair who struggled to speak. He thanked me for coming. It was I who was so deeply grateful to him for coming. Everywhere we went, the stories we heard were heart-wrenching. On the first trip, someone came up to Simone with a picture of her sister who had recently died of cancer because she didn't have health insurance and her cancer was discovered too late. Simone still carries the picture of Catherine with her. For me, the experiences and learnings on the bus have been deep and lasting. Not only did we attempt to bring good news and hope where we traveled, but we also came to listen. In 2018, we visited First Friends in Kearney, New Jersey. Their office is right outside the walls of a prison where refugees, immigrants, and asylum seekers were being held and treated like criminals. New Jersey had enacted prison reform, which resulted in the release of a significant number of prisons. So in order for the for-profit private prisons to make money, they were looking to fill beds. So they began housing the immigrants and the refugees. Dion, a young man from Africa who had been granted asylum, shared his story. For nearly 1 year, he was held in the prison. He never heard his name pronounced. Everyone was called by their bed number. The treatment they received was very harsh and included beatings. First Friends were the only lifeline these refugees and asylees and immigrants had. First Friends provided legal assistance and an opportunity for those in prison to come next door for classes and to work on crafts reflecting the cultures of their native countries. For those finally freed, First Friends helped them navigate in a world new to them. Nuns on the Bus has driven thousands of miles across the United States to prophetically speak for justice and advocate for federal policies that address economic and racial disparities, the need for immigration reform, access to health care for all, a just tax system, and others. Several of our tours have focused on the need to vote. The theme of this year's virtual tour is Who We Elect Matters. In our representative democracy, we give enormous power to elected officials to make decisions that impact the lives of all. So we are calling for people to take their privilege to vote seriously and to vote for lawmakers whose positions reflect the common good and respect human dignity. Over 60 events, many of them town halls, are scheduled. They began this past week and will continue through October 23rd. One of the blessings of this being a virtual tour is that you don't have to live in a specific area to participate. You can participate via Zoom. Check out the times and places of our rallies, site visits, and town halls by going to the site on your screen and sign up if you'd like to participate. Your commitment to do justice, to respect all, and to be a compassionate presence is your ticket to ride. So hop on the bus and let's go.
Yes, thank you again, Sister Richelle. That inspiration in our hearts, please sing or listen along at home as David plays our hymn, One More Step. Amen. The mission of this church carries on in these uncertain times and is more important than ever. We're so grateful to have the financial support of our members and friends. Please give as generously as you're able. Today's Social Action Committee Special Collection is for the Coalition on Human Needs, Sister Richelle's organization. Phil will now post the information for giving to PBUUC and CHN in the chat window. This information can also be found in the online order service. Our offertory music will be Candle on the Water from Disney's Pete's Dragon.
thank you for your presence this morning. As we go forth, I invite each of us to hold in our hearts the challenging words of Joan Chittister. To be among the average but courageous people who forever seek the truth, defend the weak, bring the peace, and always, always, always stand up to protest injustice. And in the words of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, fight for the things you care about in a way that will lead others to join you. Amen.
Thank you. Remember, if you would like to stay in conversation with Sister Richelle, please stay in this main Zoom room by declining or ignoring the invitation to a breakout room. Now we will hear Spirit of Life.
I will now extinguish the chalice. Thank you all for coming.